I'll be speaking on the bilingual language claim of fact speech. And the speakers claim that the bilingual education in the classroom has a negative effect on California's educational system is insufficient to prove her argument. In her first claim, the speaker does not present enough data. In her second claim, the speaker deviates from her main proposition. And in her concluding claim, the speaker doesn't define her terms. The speaker introduced her proposition by mentioning Prop 227-227, which was passed in 1998 to refocus attention on English learning in the classroom. In her first claim, the speaker states that bilingual education programs have a negative effect on California's educational program. Yet in the claim, the speaker does not present enough data to support her main claim. The speaker mentions an increase in student test scores after the passing of Prop 227. This statement says, elementary schools without ESL programs had a 10-point gain in reading, and with ESL programs, they had a 6-point gain in reading. So this data is not substantial enough to make a case for an argument because the source for the data given is from a staff writer of a journal, an opinion journal. Furthermore, the speaker's second and third points to her first claim are declarative statements without, again, any data. She mentions that those students who aren't able to test out of bilingual education classes remain socially isolated and drop out of school. Again, there's no data presented here, but according to information elsewhere in other reputable sources, for example, according to World Education Services, a nonprofit organization that collects data on education, in their 2012 report, the number of students in ESL programs actually increased from 10,000 to 30,000 between 2003 and 2011. So this goes against what the advocate was claiming, that students are dropping out, which is not the case. Then she states that bilingual education programs never prepared students into mainstream classroom if funding ran out. Again, the speaker makes the statement but doesn't give us any information or data to go off on believing her or proof. The speaker's second claim is that educators in favor of bilingual education programs campaign against Prop 227 with parent waivers that bolster funding. The speaker's main point makes a point to say that enough signed parent waivers would allow for continued funding of these programs. However, at this point, it seems that the speaker has deviated from her main proposition that bilingual education programs have a negative effect on California's educational programs. It's unclear whether we are for or against bilingual education at this point. It is not clear how teachers in favor of bilingual education and their campaigning for money is relevant to her main proposition. Furthermore, the speaker coins the campaigning as uncertainty of funding. However, she does not list any sources or statements on how the funding correlates to her statement that it will help prepare students for an all-English classroom. In the speaker's final claim, she states that bilingual education has been non-existent in the classroom. Hence, most educators, if they had the option, would not go back to a bilingual program in their school system. In her concluding claim, the speaker doesn't really define this term, what she means by non-existent. With this said, there is no definition of what non-existent means in reference to bilingual education. Does she mean that even though bilingual educations are an option in the school, teachers are intentionally opting out of it? Or is it that not enough second language students enroll in the program to make it worthwhile? Basically, the only piece of information that listeners gain from the speaker's last claim is another quote from Education Next, the journal opinion. We don't get any definitions on what even an English learner student means. In conclusion, my proposition is that the speaker's claim that bilingual education in the classroom has a negative effect on California's educational system is insufficient to prove her argument. In her first claim, the speaker does not present enough data. In her second claim, the speaker deviates completely from her main proposition. And in her concluding claim, the speaker doesn't quite define her terms, so it makes it difficult to follow. Thank you.
Well, structurally, you label the proposition and the secondary issues. The way you label the secondary issues is by previewing what your basic position on each of those issues was. And I thought that that was helpful at laying out where we were going to be headed on each of those individual points. I don't know that it always helped on those individual points because sometimes they were equally confusing as to what was being said. At one point you said, on the second point, so it's not clear whether we're for or against this bilingual education, and I continue to be a little bit uncertain because some of it has to do with definitional issues, whether they are bilingual, ESL, immersion programs, any of those terminologies, they get mixed together here, and I'm not exactly sure what the comparison is that's being made. The closest that I get to an explanation on this is that 10-point versus 6-point differential, and you suggest that that is not significant in the first place, and then you kind of challenge the credibility of the source, saying it comes from a staff writer, and I don't know whether or not the staff writer is reporting on a study that was seen, whether or not they were conducting their own research or reporting on something that they had observed. I think the argument here needs to be that the advocate failed to provide adequate clarity as to why this information is important enough for us to make an inference on, and how significant that 4-point differential is never explained. I think you did challenge the idea of social isolation and the students dropping out pretty effectively by showing an increased enrollment in the ESL programs. I thought that was pretty effective. Like I said, on the second point, the issue about waivers and your question about whether or not we're for or against, that's a reasonable press. Also the issue about money resources gets a little bit confusing. The relevance of the money to whether or not this works needs to be explained, and I think you could, for instance, maybe show that money is provided to programs that are struggling, regardless of whether or not they're providing X type of program or Y kind of program. But we've got all kinds of money that's going to the schools for a variety of reasons. I'm not exactly sure why this issue came up, unless there is a demonstration that money is being denied schools because they continue to use bilingual education programs, and I didn't hear anything that suggested that was likely to be the case. And then on your third point, where you're arguing that it's not clear what non-existent means, I'm not. That seems to me like it's a little circular on this particular point. The question, comes back to the same issues that I think you had on the first point. Are the programs that we have working, or are they not working? That's really ultimately what we want to be looking at. If they're not working, why aren't they working? That would be a different question to be looking at. And I thought you did a good job trying to summarize what the argument was. And by the way, I thought the summary did a really nice job making the point at the end, saying, look, given everything that's been said, it's just not sufficient to prove that particular point. And I thought that was an effective way of finishing off the speech. Thank you.